I still remember the sting of that winter night, the kind that seeps deep into your bones and makes every breath burn. Christmas is supposed to be about warmth, about family gathered close by the fire, about laughter that softens the cold outside. But that year, Christmas felt like a knife pressed against my chest, twisting with every heartbeat. I was 32 then, a wife, a mother, and though I didn't realize it yet, a woman about to face a betrayal that would tear open every wound I thought had healed. I had grown up poor, the kind of poor where every Christmas gift was secondhand and every meal was stretched thin. When I married my husband Daniel, I thought I had escaped that life. He came from money from a family that looked like they belonged on the cover of glossy holiday magazines. They had the big house, the long dining table set with silver, the kind of laughter that sounds rehearsed but photographs well. At first they welcomed me, or at least pretended to. But as the years passed, the cracks began to show. To them, I was always the outsider, the girl who came from nothing, the woman who should be grateful she was chosen. That Christmas, the snow fell heavier than I'd ever seen blanketing the driveway as we pulled up to Daniel's parents' mansion. I carried our daughter Emma in my arms, her tiny body wrapped in a red coat I'd saved for months to buy. She was 6, still believing in Santa, still lighting up at the sight of twinkling lights. I wanted so badly for her to feel like she belonged in that house, even if I never truly did. When we walked inside, the warmth hit us, but not in the way I hoped. The fireplace roared, the lights sparkled, the laughter rang, but none of it was for us. Daniel's mother barely looked up as she handed glasses of champagne to her friends. His father gave me a polite nod as if I were a guest rather than a daughter-in-law. And Daniel, my Daniel, slipped effortlessly into their world, leaving me standing alone with Emma. We tried to fit in. Emma wandered toward the tree, her little eyes wide at the sight of golden ornaments and wrapped boxes piled high. She whispered, "Mommy, do you think Santa left one for me here?" My throat tightened because I already knew the answer. These gifts weren't for her. They never were. Hours passed and the laughter grew louder. Wine glasses clinked, stories were told around the fire. Emma tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, I'm cold." I touched her hands and they were freezing despite the warmth of the room. That was when I realized they had seated us near the drafty corner far from the fire while the rest of them clustered close together, basking in the heat. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to warm her with my own body, but when I looked toward the fire, I saw them all smiling, laughing, pointing at some old family photo. Not one of them noticed my daughter shivering, not even her father. I should have said something then. I should have stood up, pulled her close, and walked out of that house forever. But betrayal doesn't always come in one sudden blow, it seeps in slowly, like ice under the skin. And that night I stayed. I told myself I was staying for Emma, but deep down, I think I was still clinging to the hope that Daniel would see us, would choose us, would remember the vows he once made. But instead, as I held my little girl close, I overheard laughter that made my blood run cold. His mother leaned toward one of her friends and said, "Well, at least Daniel finally married someone simple. She'll never question where the money goes." They laughed, laughed, as if my very existence was a joke. And then, as if fate itself wanted to slice me open, I heard Daniel's voice join theirs. "She doesn't need to know," he said. "She wouldn't understand anyway." My chest tightened. My ears rang. In that moment, I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But Emma leaned her head against me, whispering, "Mommy, I'm sleepy." And I swallowed my pain for her sake. Because how could I let her see me break on Christmas night? What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. That the laughter I heard by the fireplace was not just cruelty, but the edge of a secret Daniel had been keeping for years. A secret that would unravel everything: our marriage, our family, and the very foundation of who I thought I was. I didn't sleep that night. After we left Daniel's parents' mansion, I tucked Emma into our bed and watched the color climb back into her cheeks under a mountain of blankets. The glow from the hallway spilled across her lashes, catching on the salt lines the cold had etched there. I brewed tea I never drank and wandered the apartment like a ghost, touching the places where our life once felt simple, Crayon suns on the refrigerator, a chipped mug that still smelled like cinnamon, the tiny red coat I'd saved 3 months to buy. Every few minutes, I pressed my palm to Emma's forehead, as if warmth alone could rewrite the evening. But warmth can't rewrite a truth that's already spoken. It only throws the shadows into sharper shape. I sat on the floor beside the door and listened to the quiet tick of the radiator until another sound rose to meet it. The memory of their laughter, traveling through walls and smoke and polished glass. The fire's applause behind them while my daughter shivered. That image kept looping in my head like a cruel carol, the child shaking in the draft, the adults smiling in the heat. By dawn, the tea had gone cold, and my resolve had turned to steel. The words I'd heard, "She doesn't need to know, she wouldn't understand anyway," had burrowed under my skin. Secrets are cowards. They only survive in the dark. When Daniel finally came home, the hallway light still off, he smelled like his father's aftershave and triumph. He paused when he saw the packed overnight bag by the door, then glanced toward the bedroom where Emma slept. "You made a scene," he said softly, "the way you'd warn a dog off a couch." I almost laughed. A scene, as if humiliation were theater and not a weather system he'd ushered into our lives. I told him to sit. He didn't. So I did, pulling a folder from beneath the sofa and setting it on the table with a soft, undeniable thud. The papers inside had kept me awake: bank statements, with transfers I'd never approved, a credit card in my name, with holiday charges to a jewelry boutique I've never walked into, a closed account I didn't know existed, closed the same week I'd emptied my savings to cover a missed paycheck he swore was a clerical error. He watched me turn each page like I was flipping a deck of cards no one had taught him to count. "It's complicated," he said. "It's temporary." He used the voice people save for children and debt collectors. I told him to try again. He said his parents stepped in sometimes to help with liquidity. He said bonuses were delayed. He said I should trust him. I said the problem with trust is that it dies so quietly you don't notice until the room is filled with the smell of something gone. I asked what else she doesn't need to know. He didn't answer. His eyes cut toward the door, then toward the bed where our daughter slept, and something ugly flashed across his face: fear or calculation or both. I remembered the first time his mother called me brave, how the word landed heavy, not as praise, but as a forecast. Brave because to her, I was a project, a story they could retell at fundraisers about the girl who came from nothing. Brave because I'd carry the weight of their condescension without complaint. And I remembered painfully how I'd tried to fit into that story, shrinking at the edges, trimming off the parts of me that didn't match their table settings. It is one kind of betrayal to be mocked by strangers. It is another to be edited by family. When he finally sat, it wasn't because I asked. It was because his phone vibrated, and his posture loosened at a message relief blooming on his mouth before he could stop it. I could see the reflection of the text in his pupils. Reflex. He forgot to hide the smile. I stood and reached for the phone. He let me take it out of shock more than permission. The screen was still open. A thread with a contact saved as just an initial. The message, all set. He signed. Funds move next week. Above it, weeks of arrangements. I scrolled, searching for the part where the lies learned to walk. There it was, a private account, a transfer from a trust I didn't know existed, a PDF attachment labeled Post-Nuptial Agreement Final. My thumb hovered. I opened it. The words were clean and cruel. The paper said love would be measured in ledgers, that if we split the house and the investments and the accounts would revert to him because contributions were not equal. That what I thought we were building together was already divided and labeled and stored under his last name. What trust, I asked. He said it was his grandmother's, established long before you. The phrase clipped the sentence at the knees. Before you. As if I were an interruption. He said we'd been under tightening, and his father had solutions. I asked who he was in the text. He said a firm his family used. I scrolled higher, ignoring his outstretched hand. Another attachment: photos of Emma and me at the fall festival, The kind we'd post to make a little life look like a big one, painted pumpkins, a graham cracker house lopsided with candy. The caption in the thread read, "She looks pliable. Time to formalize." I sat very still. The room receded like tide. I think there are harms that bruise and harms that unmake. This felt like the second kind. Not just the money or the mockery, but the architecture of it. The meetings I wasn't invited to, the signatures. I hadn't realized I'd been trained to give the way wife had become a role written by people who didn't love me. In the bedroom, Emma stirred and sighed the way children do when they are practicing being brave even in their sleep. For a moment, I saw two futures flickering like candles in a draft one, where I swallowed this and learned to smile across their table, and one where I refused and took the storm with me out the door. I chose the storm. I told him we'd be gone for a while. He said I was overreacting. He said I didn't understand how the world worked. I said I understood perfectly that the world he loved was one where doors opened for men who pronounced the words right and closed on women who learned to whisper. He reached for me. I stepped back. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Make sure she signs it before the holiday. Easier cleanup if she leaves. I looked at him and felt something inside me settle not into despair, but into clarity. A woman can survive years of small apologies, but a single honest sentence can save her life. I woke Emma and packed a bag with the essentials of being 6. The red coat, the stuffed rabbit with one ear, a book with a glittery cover. I wrote a note that did not say I'm sorry. On the way out, I took photographs of the documents. Paper has a way of forgetting, pictures don't. In the hallway, Emma asked if we were going on a trip. I said yes to somewhere warmer and didn't mean temperature. As we stepped into the morning, the air bit my cheeks, but I felt lighter, as if the cold were a hand at my back. We walked past the doorman, who always called Emma boss, and she smiled for the first time since last night. On the curb, I flagged a cab and gave an address I hadn't said aloud in years. My aunt's house across town, the place I used to run when the world felt larger than my body. As we pulled away, I saw Daniel's reflection in the lobby glass phone in his hand, mouth open around my name that suddenly did not belong to him. I held Emma's hand and whispered something I needed to hear as much as she did. We are not difficult. We are just not theirs. My aunt's house hadn't changed much in 10 years, though time had leaned against its siding and left the paint a little chipped, the porch railing a little loose. Still stepping onto that porch with Emma's mittened hand in mine felt like walking back into a memory I had once tried to bury. My Aunt Margaret was my mother's younger sister, the woman who had raised me more often than my own parents did after they drifted into their own storms. She opened the door in a worn cardigan, her eyes widening first in shock and then in the kind of tenderness that can undo you faster than cruelty ever could. She didn't ask questions, not at first. She simply pulled Emma into her arms, pressed her cheek to her hair, and then reached for me, holding us both, as if she knew we'd been carrying too much weight alone. Only after she'd settled Emma on the couch with cocoa and a blanket did she look at me with the steady gaze of someone who sees more than you're ready to reveal. "Tell me," she said softly. And so I did. The words tumbled out, jagged fragments of firelight laughter, bank statements, a contract signed behind my back. I confessed to the shame of staying silent too long, to the fear that maybe they were right, that maybe I was just a girl from nowhere who should have been grateful. Margaret listened without interrupting her hands, folded her eyes, sharpening only when I repeated the phrase I couldn't shake. "She looks pliable. Time to formalize." At that, her mouth tightened, and she excused herself briefly, returning with a locked tin box I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. She set it on the table, opened it, and pulled out a stack of letters tied with twine. "I hoped you'd never need to see these," she whispered. My stomach nodded. She explained that after my mother died, she'd found them hidden in a drawer. Letters from my grandmother, the same grandmother Daniel's family spoke of, with reverence, the one whose trust supposedly excluded me. Letters that revealed a truth I had never been told. My grandmother had left money in my name too. A trust fund meant for me and any children I might one day have. It wasn't vast like the one Daniel's family controlled, but it was enough to ensure I was never dependent on anyone's mercy. The betrayal twisted sharper. They hadn't just mocked me. They had deliberately hidden what was mine. Margaret admitted she'd kept the letters from me when I was younger, fearing my father or later Daniel might exploit me if they knew. But they found out somehow, she murmured. That's why they wanted your signature. They needed you to give up your claim without even knowing it existed. The room spun. Every smile at those holiday dinners, every toast raised to family, every time Daniel had reassured me, it all flickered in my mind like film burning in a projector. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had erased me. Emma stirred beneath her blanket, whispering in her sleep. I tucked the letters back into the box, my hands trembling. Margaret placed her palm over mine. This is not the end of your story, she said firmly. This is where you take it back. The next weeks blurred into planning. I photographed every letter, every page of that hidden contract. I met with a lawyer, a friend of Margaret's, recommended a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She told me plainly that Daniel and his family had crossed more than moral lines, they had crossed legal ones. Fraud, coercion, concealment. She explained how the trust in my name had been intentionally obscured, how their attempts to pressure me into signing away rights could be dismantled in court. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the ground under my feet solidify. Still, nights were heavy. Emma would crawl into bed with me, whispering questions I didn't always know how to answer. Does Daddy miss me? She asked once, her big brown eyes searching mine. I swallowed hard and told her the truth. I could manage, Daddy loves you, but sometimes people forget how to show it. She frowned, unconvinced, and pressed her rabbit closer to her chest. It broke me that even at 6 she understood that love should never feel so cold. Meanwhile, Daniel's calls turned frantic, then furious, then eerily calm. Voicemails alternated between pleas, come home, let's fix this, and threats, you don't know what you're doing. Once his mother's clipped voice came through instead. Think carefully about how far you want to push this. Family matters should stay private. Her tone carried the same polished disdain I'd heard by the fireplace, only now sharpened into warning. But I was no longer that woman shivering in silence beside a drafty window. Each threat only fueled my resolve. Each plea only revealed their desperation. And when Daniel finally appeared at Margaret's doorstep one evening, his breath steaming in the cold, his smile too practiced, I stood taller than I ever had before. He asked to come inside. I told him no. He said Emma needed stability. I told him she already had it with me. He said I was overreacting. I told him he mistook survival for drama. His jaw clenched. You'll ruin us all, he spat. And I realized then that by us he never meant Emma and me. He meant his family, his inheritance, his name. When I closed the door, my hands shook, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, the body's way of remembering it could fight. Behind me, Margaret squeezed my shoulder and whispered, that's the first door of many you'll close on them. And she was right, because what came next would not just be about leaving. It would be about reclaiming everything they thought they had stolen. The first hearing was scheduled in early spring, when the snow had melted, but the air still carried that edge of cold that reminds you, winter hasn't quite finished with you. I walked into the courthouse holding Emma's hand, her red coat a splash of defiance against the gray marble walls. Margaret walked with us, too steady and unflinching, the way only someone who has weathered storms of her own can be. Daniel was already there with his family, lined up like they were posing for a portrait. Polished shoes, expensive suits, a wall of composure built on generations of privilege. His mother's lips curved into the faintest smile when she saw me, as if she still believed I'd fold under the weight of their gaze. But I didn't. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, remember, they count on silence. You're here to break it. The proceedings dragged on each side, presenting papers and arguments, each word a shard of glass I had to hold carefully. Their lawyer tried to paint me as ungrateful, unstable, irresponsible. He suggested that I was manipulated by outside influences, meaning Margaret, as if I couldn't possibly think for myself. He argued that Daniel had only tried to protect family assets. When they brought up the contract, I watched his hands tremble ever so slightly because he knew I had proof it was pushed under my nose without full disclosure. Then came the moment my lawyer revealed the letters. One by one, she laid them out on the table, my grandmother's handwriting looping across the pages, naming me, naming Emma, describing a future meant to be secure and dignified. Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's face paled. His mother's knuckles whitened against her pearls. My lawyer's voice was calm but firm. This trust was hidden deliberately. My client was deceived. The signatures they demanded were not for protection but for theft. In that moment, I felt something shift. The shame I had carried for years, the voice that told me I was small, unworthy, replaceable, it began to dissolve. I looked at Daniel and realized I wasn't seeing my husband anymore. I was seeing a man caught in the act of trying to erase me. The judge's eyes lingered on me when he called a recess. I could tell he saw more than just paperwork. He saw a woman clawing her way out of a silence too many women had been forced to swallow. During the break, Daniel approached me in the hallway. His voice was low, urgent, almost pleading. "We can fix this," he said. "Think about Emma. Do you really want her to grow up in the middle of this war?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same man who had let our daughter shiver by the fireplace while he laughed with his family. "She's already in the middle of it," I said quietly. "The difference is now she'll see what it looks like when her mother refuses to bow." He tried to smile, but it cracked at the edges. For the first time, I saw fear in him, not of losing me, but of losing the control he thought was his birthright. The hearings stretched over weeks. Each day I returned Emma's small hand tucked in mine, Margaret's steady presence at my side. The family grew more desperate, their tactics more cruel. They spread rumors about me, whispered that I was unstable, unfit, even dangerous. But the truth has a way of seeping through cracks, and my lawyer wielded every piece of evidence like a blade honed sharp by patience and fury. One afternoon, after particularly damning testimony about the concealed trust, Daniel's mother muttered loudly enough for me to hear, "She'll regret this. We'll make sure of it." I turned to her, meeting her eyes without flinching, and for the first time she looked away. At night, when the exhaustion threatened to crush me, I would sit beside Emma's bed and watch her sleep. She no longer asked why we weren't at her grandparents' house, why her father wasn't tucking her in. Instead, she held her rabbit tight and whispered, "We're safe here, right, Mommy?" And I would answer, "Yes, my love, we are safe." I needed her to believe it even on nights when my own belief wavered. The climax came during the final hearing. My lawyer presented the timeline, the hidden letters, the fraudulent contract, the messages about me being pliable. The judge's expression hardened as he read. Daniel shifted in his chair, his father staring straight ahead, his mother dabbing at invisible tears. And then, in a voice that filled the silent chamber, the judge declared the contract void, acknowledged the concealed trust, and granted me control over it for Emma's future. He condemned the deception in terms so plain there was no space left for their polished excuses. The sound of the gavel striking was like thunder breaking through years of suffocation. My hands trembled, but not from fear this time, from release, from victory small but monumental. Daniel's family left the courtroom quickly, their heels clicking sharp against the floor. Daniel lingered, his eyes darting to Emma as if searching for a thread to hold on to. But Emma clung to me, hiding her face in my coat. He opened his mouth, then closed it, and finally walked away. Outside, the air smelled of rain. Margaret wrapped her arm around me, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry, not from sorrow, but from the strange, overwhelming relief of knowing I had not only survived but fought back. Still, the battle had left scars. And I knew the hardest part wasn't the courtroom or the documents. The hardest part would be learning how to rebuild a life not defined by betrayal. Rebuilding was not a sudden miracle. It was a slow and often painful stitching together of the pieces of myself that I thought had been lost forever. After the hearings ended, the silence in our apartment was deafening. No more voicemails filled with threats or pleas. No more documents slipped under my nose. Just Emma's laughter echoing faintly through the hallways as she rediscovered the joy of being a child without fear. But there were nights when the quiet pressed too hard against my chest. I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at the stack of official papers, the judge's ruling, the trust documents now in my name, the letters from my grandmother, and I'd feel both vindicated and hollow. Victory, I learned, doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like a wound finally closing, still tender and aching even as it heals. Emma adjusted faster than I did. Children are resilient that way. She asked fewer questions about her father as the weeks passed, as if her heart had decided it was safer to forget than to keep reaching out. Still, I caught her sometimes standing by the window, her rabbit tucked under her chin, staring out as if waiting for someone who would never come. Each time I would kneel beside her and remind her gently, "You don't need to wait. Everything we need is already here." And slowly she began to believe me. Margaret became more than an anchor. She became the bridge to a version of family I had always craved, but never truly had. She told stories about my mother, about the laughter that used to echo through this same house before life splintered us apart. She reminded me that bloodlines don't define love, actions do. For the first time, Emma had a grandmother figure who baked cookies with her, who taught her how to knit lopsided scarves, who tucked her in with bedtime stories about strong women who refused to break. I threw myself into work too. I had always been good with words, good at weaving truth into stories. So I started writing again, this time not for survival, but for release. Late at night, after Emma slept, I would pour the ache onto paper, stories about betrayal, resilience, the quiet strength of women who refused to vanish. At first, it was just for me. But then I began sharing them online, and to my surprise, people responded. Messages poured in from women who said they felt less alone, who said my words gave them the courage to confront their own betrayals. It was as if by speaking my truth, I was helping others find theirs. Still, the shadows lingered. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night convinced I could hear Daniel's voice outside the door, that polished, persuasive tone he wielded like a blade. I'd lie in the dark holding Emma close, my heart thundering until I remembered he had no power here anymore. The courts had stripped away his leverage and I had stripped away his access to my soul. But trauma has a way of replaying itself even when logic insists you're safe. The turning point came one spring afternoon when Emma came home from school with a handmade card. On the cover, she had drawn the three of us herself, me and Margaret, standing under a rainbow. Inside, in her crooked handwriting, she had written, "My family is small, but strong." I pressed the card to my chest and felt something settle inside me, something that had been restless for years. For the first time, I believed that strength didn't require perfection. It required truth, and we had finally built a life rooted in it. Months later, word reached me through a mutual acquaintance that Daniel's family had retreated from public life. The whispers said the scandal of the courtroom had stained their reputation, that business partners were wary that the perfect facade had cracked. A part of me expected to feel satisfaction, even joy at their downfall. But instead, I felt only distance. Their ruin was no longer my story. I had my own to live. I won't pretend there weren't moments of bitterness. There were days when I wanted to shout, to demand why they thought it was acceptable to gamble with a woman's life, with a child's innocence, all for the sake of money and pride. But bitterness is a poison, and I had already swallowed enough. So instead, I chose to let go. Not to forgive them, because forgiveness is earned, not demanded, but to free myself from the weight of their shadow. On the anniversary of that dreadful Christmas, I lit a fire in Margaret's hearth, one that warmed the whole room, not just a chosen few. Emma and I decorated a small tree with paper ornaments she had cut herself, each one shaky, with the earnest effort of little hands. We sat together by the flames, sipping cocoa, her head resting against my shoulder. And as I watched the light dance across her face, I made myself a promise: never again would she shiver in the cold while others laughed. Never again would she be made to feel small so that others could feel powerful. The past will always live in me, the cold draft of that corner, the sting of their laughter, the betrayal that nearly broke me. But it no longer defines me. I am defined by the choice I made to stand, to fight, to walk away. By the love I give my daughter each day. By the words I share with women who need to hear they are not alone. If you're watching this and you've ever felt erased, betrayed, or silenced, know this: your story does not end in the cold. You can build a fire of your own, one that no one can take from you. Thank you for listening to mine. If my journey touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can find strength in these stories. And tell me in the comments, what is the moment you chose yourself, even when the world told you not to?